You know what no one prepares you for? Getting blindsided by the very person who once praised you like you were irreplaceable. I gave my heart and soul to that company. 6 years of dedication, late nights, skipped vacations, working through weekends. Not because anyone made me, but because I genuinely believed I was building something. Building trust, building a future, building respect. I was the guy who always stepped up. The one who solved problems when everyone else threw their hands in the air. The one who trained new hires, kept the peace between departments, and showed up early even on days when I had every reason not to. So imagine my confusion when one day, out of the blue, I get called into my boss's office. He's got this look on his face, this rehearsed sympathy. You know the one, where the eyes try to look sorry, but the mouth is almost smirking. He starts with, "You've been incredible here, really. But unfortunately, the company's entering a restructuring phase." I froze. Restructuring? This wasn't some struggling startup. We were making record profits. And then, he said it. "We're eliminating your position." Just like that. 6 years, gone in a sentence. No heads up, no chance to transition. Just a well-practiced corporate execution. I remember just sitting there, staring at him, not saying a word. Because if I had opened my mouth, I might have laughed, or screamed, or both. But here's where it gets really interesting. The day after I was let go, I found out who replaced me. It wasn't someone more experienced. It wasn't someone with better results. It was his daughter, Ashley, fresh out of business school, no field experience, no real understanding of what we did. But she had something I didn't, the right last name. Apparently she'd been shadowing operations for months, which, now that I think about it, explains why she kept showing up to meetings she wasn't invited to, why she hovered around my desk, asked random questions, and took notes like she was preparing for something big. Turns out, she was. I wasn't just being laid off. I was being replaced. By blood. By family. By someone who had never earned their seat at the table. And here's the kicker. Mr. Dawson, my boss, genuinely thought I was going to walk away quietly. He had no idea that I had built connections far beyond that office. Connections that would come back into the picture a lot sooner than he expected. He didn't know what I knew. And he definitely didn't know who I knew. When I walked out of that building for the last time, I wasn't angry. Not yet, anyway. I was numb. Like my brain hadn't fully caught up with what had just happened. My feet moved on autopilot. My box of things in my arms felt heavier than it should have. My keycard was already deactivated. That part stung. 6 years. 6 years of building systems, mentoring new hires, fixing problems before they became disasters. And I couldn't even use the front door anymore. It felt like I had died, and no one thought to attend the funeral. I sat in my car, engine off, staring at the wheel. I thought about how just last week, I was leading a meeting where the investors literally applauded the numbers I'd pulled in. How just 3 days ago, Mr. Dawson had told me, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Now I knew. He'd fire me and slide his daughter into my seat without blinking. And suddenly, the pieces started falling into place. The last few months hadn't been normal. Ashley had started hanging around more, popping into meetings that didn't concern her, asking questions that felt strategic. At the time, I brushed it off, figured she was just trying to learn. But now, I realized I had unknowingly trained my own replacement. All the templates I had created, the processes, the relationships, she had been studying me like I was a case file, learning everything without doing any of the work. It wasn't just a firing, it was a setup. Mr. Dawson had played the long game, used me to transfer knowledge while he waited for the right moment to drop the axe. And maybe I could have accepted it, if she was actually qualified, but she wasn't. She didn't understand the back-end architecture. She didn't know how to talk to clients without sounding like she was reading from a textbook. She'd never stayed past 5 p.m. in her life. She was born into privilege, and that's all she ever needed. But what they both forgot, what they completely underestimated, was the fact that while they were busy playing politics, I was building relationships. Real ones. I wasn't just an employee. I was someone people trusted. Especially the investors. One of them, Mr. Huang, had been a guest speaker back when I was in grad school. He remembered me, told me years ago that if I ever needed advice, I should reach out. We'd spoken often since. He respected my work. Another, Miss Carter, was a high-stakes investor who nearly pulled out of the company 2 years ago, until I personally convinced her to stay. She called me her voice of reason. They weren't just names in a spreadsheet to me. They were allies. And in that moment, sitting in my car, I realized something that made me smile, truly smile. For the first time since I got fired, they fired the one person keeping the whole thing standing and handed the controls to someone who had no clue what she was doing. I didn't have to get revenge. I just had to wait for reality to hit. But even so, I wasn't just going to wait. I was going to nudge it. Just enough. So the very next morning I woke up early, before the sun even touched the windows. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. That kind of cold, razor-sharp focus that only shows up when you've been burned deeply enough to know exactly what not to do next. I didn't post on social media. Didn't call coworkers to rant. No emotional explosions. No public meltdown. Instead, I did what I've always done best. I got organized. I pulled out my laptop and opened every file I had saved. Reports, forecasts, emails, client feedback, performance metrics, everything. I didn't steal anything. I didn't need to. Everything I had ever done for the company, I had documented it for myself too. For growth, for record, for moments like this. I laid it all out, like evidence. And it painted a picture clearer than any accusation ever could. I was the engine behind the machine. Ashley, she'd never built anything. She didn't even know which clients were sensitive to risk or which vendor accounts had special conditions. I knew that because I created those systems. And they thought they could just swap me out like a busted light bulb? No, that wasn't how this story would end. I drafted 3 short emails, one to each of the major investors. Mr. Huang, Miss Carter, and a third one, Mr. Delaney, who always appreciated my brutal honesty. I didn't rant. I didn't even mention Ashley. Instead, I simply said, I wanted to personally thank you for your support over the years. I've recently parted ways with the company. However, I'd love to share some insights from my time there, particularly regarding upcoming shifts in strategy and risk management that may affect your interests. That's it. No drama, just value. All 3 replied within 24 hours. They weren't just curious, they were concerned. We scheduled a quiet meeting in a private office space I rented with my severance. Best $300 I've ever spent. Before the meeting, I prepped a clean, bulletproof presentation. No speculation, no emotion, just numbers, decisions, consequences, the kinds of things investors care about. And when that day came, I walked into that room not as a bitter ex-employee, but as a consultant, a man with insider knowledge and the credibility to back it up. They shook my hand like I was still part of the company, maybe even more so now. And I could tell, the moment I clicked to the 3rd slide and showed Ashley's proposed changes to a key vendor contract, that they were already connecting the dots. They didn't say anything incriminating. These people were smart. But the way Miss Carter narrowed her eyes, the way Mr. Huang took notes in all caps, that's when I knew. They saw it. They understood the risk. And they didn't like what they saw. The meeting wrapped in just under 45 minutes, but the aftershocks started almost immediately. I was barely back in my car when my phone buzzed. First an email from Miss Carter's office asking for follow-up documentation, then a text from Mr. Huang's assistant requesting a second confidential call. That's investor speak for, we're loading the cannons. I could almost picture the boardroom, glossy mahogany table, leather chairs, Mr. Dawson sitting at the head, smug, secure, when the first salvo hit. An urgent calendar invite marked Capital Risk Review, mandatory. In that company, mandatory means drop everything and show up. By noon, my former teammates were WhatsApping me frantic messages. Dude, the investors are here unannounced. Ashley looks like she's about to cry. They've frozen 2 of her new initiatives. I didn't gloat. I poured myself a black coffee, opened my laptop, and watched the dominoes topple in real time. Investors asked Ashley to walk them through her projected Q3 margins. She couldn't explain a single underlying assumption because I'd built those models and she'd never learned the logic. Vendor panic. Cash flow alarm bells started ringing. Boardroom ice bath. By the end of day, an emergency board vote was scheduled. Not next quarter, not next week. The next morning at 8 a.m. That alone told me everything. The wolves were already circling. I didn't send a single told you so text. I didn't leak anything to the press. I simply compiled the requested documentation. Clear, neutral, time-stamped. No adjectives, no adverbs, just data. Because here's the thing about power plays. The quieter you are, the louder the facts become. That night, as the sun dropped behind the skyline, I took a walk past the old office tower. Lights blazed on the top floor, the boardroom floor, well past 10 p.m. Silhouettes paced behind tinted glass, phones glued to ears, crisis talk body language in full swing. And for the first time since the day I carried that cardboard box to my car, I felt light. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just free. They had gambled on nepotism. I had invested in relationships and competence. And the market was about to issue its verdict. By 7:45 a.m. the next morning, the boardroom was already full. Ashley had shown up early, her face pale, her confidence cracked. He looked tired, older, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. I wasn't there, of course, but I didn't need to be. I had eyes in the room, old colleagues, former interns I had mentored, people who had always respected me. Not because I had power, but because I treated them like they mattered. One of them texted me during the meeting. They're going after her hard. One investor just asked her, "Can you walk us through even one successful decision you've made on your own?" She froze. Another wrote, "Dawson is trying to deflect. Keeps saying she's just learning. But Carter isn't having it." She literally said, "We don't pay to teach children. We pay to protect millions." And that was it. That was the moment. The shift. The board didn't yell. They didn't slam fists. They just voted. Ashley was removed from her role effective immediately. Not demoted, not transitioned, removed. Security escorted her from the building before lunchtime. And her father? Well, let's just say the board gave him a very clear choice. Step down gracefully, or we initiate an internal investigation into your conduct, including the decision to fire the only person delivering sustainable ROI. Guess which option he picked? Yep, he resigned. That afternoon, the company issued a press release filled with corporate fluff. Leadership restructuring to position the firm for scalable growth. Translation? They realized they bet on the wrong horse, and they were trying to save face. Meanwhile, on my end, I was sitting in my apartment, a cup of coffee in one hand, my dog curled up at my feet, watching the chaos unfold like a spectator at a private drama. No one knew I had anything to do with it, except those who mattered. And then, the phone rang. It was Miss Carter. No assistant, no layers, just her, direct. "We're assembling an advisory team," she said. "Someone with your operational insight and stakeholder awareness would be invaluable. Are you available to consult?" I let the silence hang just long enough to feel the power shift. "Yes," I said. "I believe I am." 2 weeks later, I walked back into the same building I'd once been escorted out of. But this time, I wasn't carrying a cardboard box. I wasn't avoiding eye contact with reception. I wasn't shrinking. I was invited. And not as an employee, as a strategic advisor. The title didn't matter nearly as much as what it symbolized. I was back. But now I was holding the pen. The first person I passed was the security guard who had given me a sympathetic look the day I was let go. He stood up straight and smiled. "Welcome back, sir." "Sir." Yeah, I could get used to that. Upstairs, the energy was different. Tense, careful. The same people who once looked past me in the hallways were now nodding, smiling, offering greetings with just a little too much politeness. Guilt, maybe. Fear, possibly. Respect? Definitely earned. I wasn't there to rub anything in. That wasn't my style. But I also wasn't there to play nice with the remnants of Dawson's reign. The board had made it clear. They wanted the company to heal, grow, and never repeat the same mistakes. And that meant starting with rebuilding trust. So I got to work. I met with every department lead. I listened more than I spoke. I didn't give orders. I gave perspective. Because I knew the business better than anyone still standing in that building. And now I had the freedom to reshape it. One moment stood out. In the marketing team's meeting room, I found one of Ashley's former assistants, young, nervous, eyes wide like a deer in headlights. She looked terrified. I asked her to walk me through the campaign calendar. At first, she stumbled, clearly bracing for criticism. But I saw her notes, her ideas, her logic, and they were good, really good. She just hadn't been allowed to use her voice before. When she finished, I looked her in the eye and said, "You've got a sharp instinct. I want you to develop this. Present it next week. Your name on the slides." She blinked, stunned. Then she smiled, Not one of those fake office smiles. A real one. That's when I realized this wasn't just about revenge. This was about restoring value, giving power back to the people who deserved it. When I left that day, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned, balanced, like the universe had cracked open, righted itself, and handed me exactly what I'd earned, not what I'd been given. And I knew right then, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of their chapter and the beginning of mine. You know what the funny thing is? After everything, after being blindsided, replaced, written off, I didn't want revenge anymore. Not really. What I wanted was clarity, control, freedom. And for the first time in years, I had all three. They offered me a permanent executive role, director of strategic operations, corner office, team of my own, full control over budgets and cross-department planning. But I said no. Yeah, you heard that right. I said no. Because somewhere between getting fired and watching an empire nearly collapse under the weight of nepotism, I realized I didn't want to build someone else's legacy anymore. I wanted to build mine. So I thanked the board, shook their hands, and offered something different. Let me stay on as an independent consultant. I'll clean up what's left, help you restructure, train the next real leaders, and then I'm out. They were stunned. Not offended, impressed. Because they knew I wasn't walking away bitter. I was walking away ready. Over the next few months, I rebuilt that place from the inside out. I restructured workflows, coached managers who were never mentored properly, and corrected every bad system Ashley had left behind. But I didn't stay late. I didn't miss weekends. I didn't burn myself out to prove anything to anyone. This time, I worked on my terms. And the best part? The company didn't just recover. It thrived. With the right people in place, morale shot up, client trust returned, and for the first time in a long time, the staff felt seen. No more favoritism. No more shadow promotions. Just results. One afternoon, I walked into the break room and saw that same young woman I encouraged weeks ago, now confidently leading a brainstorming session. Post-it notes everywhere, energy high, people laughing, collaborating. And she was glowing. That's when it hit me. This was my real revenge. Not kicking people out, but helping the right ones rise up. Not getting even, but getting better. That night, I walked out of that building, sun setting behind me, phone buzzing with a new opportunity from a startup across town, and smiled to myself. Not about a month after everything settled, I received an email from someone I never expected to hear from again. Ashley. The subject line? Just one word. Apology. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the screen for a while, sipping my coffee, feeling zero of the anxiety that would have once gripped me at the sight of her name. Eventually, I clicked it. It was fine, polite, cautious. She said she didn't fully understand the responsibilities she was stepping into, that she never meant to take my position, and that she hoped I could one day forgive the circumstances. No mention of how she benefited from those circumstances. No mention of how she took credit for things she never built. But you know what? I didn't need her to admit it. I didn't need closure from her. Because I wasn't the same man she helped push out of that office. I had rebuilt myself. Without their help, without their titles, without their name on my paycheck. And that meant I didn't owe her anger. I didn't owe her silence. I owed her nothing. So I archived the email and moved on. In the weeks that followed, things took off. The startup I mentioned, it wasn't just an opportunity. It was a rocket ship. They brought me on as a founding partner. Same skills, but this time applied to something meaningful, agile, fast-paced. No boardroom politics, just smart people solving real problems. And the best part? No one cared about last names. People were judged by ideas, not bloodlines. I finally felt like I was building something I could own. Something that wasn't borrowed from someone else's empire. A few months into it, one of the investors from my old company reached out. He said, "I just wanted to say, Thank you. You didn't just save our investment, you reminded us what actual leadership looks like. That one hit deep, because leadership wasn't about titles, or authority, or even intelligence. It was about vision, resilience, and knowing when to walk away from something broken. Not because you gave up, but because you finally saw your value. And now, when people ask me how I handled being fired and replaced by someone who didn't earn it, I just smile. They replace me with their daughter, but I replace them with peace, power, and a future of my own design. Sometimes people ask me, would you go back and change anything? And I think about that a lot more than I let on. Would I have seen it coming sooner? Would I have protected my role? Would I have said no when Ashley started showing up to my meetings? Maybe. But then again, if I had fought harder to keep a seat at the wrong table, I might have missed the opportunity to build a new one. For myself, and others who were overlooked like I once was. See, I used to think loyalty meant staying no matter what, no matter how unfair, no matter how manipulated you felt, no matter how invisible they made you. Now I know better. Loyalty isn't about staying, it's about protecting your peace. And sometimes, protecting your peace means letting go. When I look back now, I don't see a guy who got fired. I see a guy who outgrew the box they tried to keep him in. I see a guy who got pushed out of a door, only to realize it was a cage. I see growth, evolution, liberation. One evening, I ran into an old coworker at a cafe. He looked exhausted, corporate badge still clipped to his belt, phone buzzing non-stop. He asked, "Man, how did you do it? How did you bounce back?" I laughed softly, by remembering who I was before they convinced me I was lucky to be there. He just nodded, quiet, like it hit a little too close to home. We live in a world where people in power often think they can get away with anything. Slide their kids into positions, overlook talent, treat employees like placeholders. But here's what they forget. The quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones who don't demand attention but consistently deliver, we're the ones the system is built on. And when you push us out, we don't scream. We rebuild, smarter, stronger, sharper. And when we return, we don't come for revenge, we come to lead. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the glass lobby of a brand new building. Tall, modern, sunlight pouring through the windows like the universe itself was nodding at me. Only this time, it wasn't someone else's company. It was mine. Together with 2 former colleagues, people who had also been overlooked, undervalued, underestimated. We launched something we believed in. Something lean, bold, real. Not built on ego. Built on execution. No fluff, no politics. Just pure strategy, honest leadership, and an obsession with doing things the right way, not the easy way. And the investors? Oh, they noticed. One by one, they began to reach out. Not with pity, not with handouts, but with respect. They wanted in. Because when people watch you rise from a fall, quietly, methodically, powerfully, they begin to understand that you weren't just part of a system. You were the reason it worked. One of our first clients? A legacy firm that once competed directly with my old employer. I walked into their boardroom in a tailored black suit, laptop under my arm, zero nervous energy in my chest. They introduced me as the one who turned collapse into clarity. And when I presented our plan, I saw something in their eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Trust. Not because I sold them a story, but because my story spoke for itself. That night, back in my new office, clean desk, minimal decor, soft jazz humming in the background, I looked out the window at the city I once thought had chewed me up and spit me out. But now, I realized it had just made room, cleared a path, tested me, and I passed. Not by getting even, but by getting better. Because here's the truth no one tells you. The best revenge is never about destruction, not even from people who once tried to bury you. Because they didn't bury you. They planted you. And now, you've grown roots so deep, no one can shake you. So here we are. If you've listened this far, maybe you've been in my shoes. Maybe you're in them right now. You gave your time, your talent, your loyalty, only to be overlooked, replaced, or discarded for someone with the right connections, or the right last name, and you're sitting there wondering if it was all a waste. Let me tell you something you need to hear. It wasn't. They didn't see your worth because they weren't meant to. Because sometimes, the people you work the hardest for are the ones who were never going to value you the way you deserved. And that's not your failure. That's their limitation. You have something they can't fake. Experience, resilience, character. And those things? They outlast favoritism. They outshine shortcuts. They outlive every single corner they tried to cut by removing you. You may have been forced out of one room, but there's another room, somewhere, waiting for you to build it. And this time, you get to choose who sits at the table. You get to set the culture. You get to protect others from the kind of betrayal you faced. You get to build something that isn't just profitable, but principled. So if you're watching this right now, feeling like the world forgot you, know this. They didn't end your story. They just gave you the best plot twist of your life. Now go write the next chapter, on your terms. And when you do, they'll be watching.